The recent teetering of retro graphics and game design back into the video game market is indicative of something rather grand. I don't think it's just the soft embrace of nostalgia or a harkening back to a safer age for some. I think it's a reaffirmation that engaging and thoughtful design is an eternal skill and one that feels ever pertinent. It's also a sign that this isn't a solved formula for what works. We don't have a metric for someone's feeling towards a game or cultural relevancy, in the same way one might have engagement metrics and game time. We can look at a score and get a general vibe, but there's a disconnect from the game to the player, then the player to the wider world, and then that wider world back to game creators. Labyrinth of the Demon King is kind of a pain to play, but gloriously so. It's grating and inconsistent, yet kind of brilliant, and one of the most unique gaming experiences I've had this year. Here's what I thought after finishing Labyrinth of the Demon King, and why you may love it, or hate it, I don't know. If you're wondering why everything in Labyrinth of the Demon King looks so gloomy and that name and aesthetic haven't clued you into some of what happens here, you are an Ashigaru, effectively a soldier in feudal Japan, whose lord has been slaughtered, leaving you adrift. The Demon King, being the entity responsible, is your answer, as slaying him may finally finish off whatever story there is to tell about your life. You have to make your way to him, dungeon crawling through winding passages, picking up puzzle pieces, and smashing your head off the wall until you find something new. Linking a first-person dungeon crawler to the likes of an old-school Resident Evil or Silent Hill, everything is murky and hard and esoteric, but also in a way that feels very committed. Combat is a pretty great expression of this feeling. It's largely melee focused, though you can get ranged weapons which have to be filled with ammunition, which is not automatically replenished. The fact that using your sword is effectively free and you never know when you're next going to find a bullet, I found myself almost never using ranged weapons. Swinging your sword requires stamina, but so too does kicking and blocking attacks. Running doesn't use stamina, but stops you from regaining it, so combat is often a process of taking just enough swings to leave stamina and physical space to avoid taking too much in return. Healing items are relatively sparse, and the only replenishing healing item is a matcha set, which requires an entire ritual and travel. It's quite an alienating feeling to know that just getting back to replenish your health items might actually end up costing you most of your health items in the process. Labyrinth of the Demon King is incredibly fond of this knife-in-the-gut catch-22. Do you sprint from the unkillable demon that has been slowly chasing you around these corridors but risk running into even more enemies, or do you fight them just enough to slow them down and get a cleaner break? Do you leave the area, forcing a respawn on the creature and therefore getting a little more time, but at the risk of respawning the other enemies you've already killed? Do you run the unkillable creature into another group of enemies and hope they clip each other instead of you and start fighting amongst themselves? There's usually a better strat, but no option quite feels good. The same feeling permeates the atmosphere. The world outside of this labyrinth is foggy, and inside, the 4 central towers you have to make your way through are ever darkening. Monsters are, well, monstrous, and the things you have to do to progress feel like you are slowly sinking into the abyss. You move from just exploring at the start to playing a story of the murder of servants, the desecration of sacred items, and exchanging shurikodama for equipment upgrades. For the unaware, shurikodama is a ball that contains a human soul, Kappas were said to have stolen from a human anus. This isn't all played for shock value. In fact, the game doesn't go out of its way to even explain shurikodama. The Japanese folklore elements of Labyrinth of the Demon King feel like rewards to get more out of the game and not something it particularly cares to educate you about. Speaking of shurikodama, the game feeds you upgrades at an almost perfect pace, giving just enough light to keep you hurtling through that seemingly never-ending dark. You can get new weapons, all of which come with unique damage, speed, and stamina requirements. This shakes up how you handle combat, and that is further shook up with certain weaponry being good against certain enemies. You are constantly encouraged to explore your loadout, and this is partially because the game will slaughter you if you try to sprint through it. My likening to Resident Evil earlier on isn't just me saying it looks old and spooky. Its puzzles are reminiscent of old survival horror, with them largely being about you hunting down broader parts of a puzzle in a small area, connecting those parts together to unlock more areas and linking old and new locations together to get the last one. Your reward for all of that is usually a horrible, wicked creature to set your blade upon. All of these different areas often have not only a different look, but are separated by a loading screen and have some architectural purpose. The lower decrepit areas may be held for servants to the Demon King, where the upper areas are for his guests, and the theming of the game plays into this too. There's a distinct edge to the puzzles that play into the defined horrors and cultural fears of feudalism in Japan. The Demon King himself is a manifestation of that overwhelming power held by those lucky enough to claim it, and you see the bastardization of spirituality, the desecration of bodies, and yet also the majesty that horrible structures can create. The labyrinth itself is also kind of impressive in many ways, being both hard to navigate and filled with secrets. In turn, the game's NPCs are all fittingly weird and interesting. There's this implied sadness and anger to many of the game's inhabitants, and this allows them all to explore desperate, depraved, and miserable stories. Like a girl who tells you about how the Demon King would hold women hostage to serve his guests until he decides to devour their flesh, and how she was saved by tasting just a bit too weird for him. This not only grounds her presence in your world, but you later rely on her services to clean a weapon for you, which is both a striking story and a powerful way of reclaiming her skills against her effective oppressor. Labyrinth of the Demon King's moment-to-moment stories are easy to ignore should you want to, but doing so will leave you less prepared to actually beat it. There are plenty of elements you can ignore and many pieces of equipment to leave behind. The whole game is a large balancing act between the skills you come to rely on, a dwindling inventory of healing and stamina regeneration items, and talismans that let you do special skills at the cost of said talisman. I often felt myself pushing through areas I was unprepared for, just hoping that my blade would save me this time. About half of the time I was right. And this brings me back to that retro style. Labyrinth of the Demon King is a bit of a throwback, but it never feels like it's doing so cynically. The game's more rough parts add to an atmosphere and tone that is not just engaging, but enchanting, and that is helped heavily by a soundtrack that is both melodically satisfying, yet constantly just a little creepy. It whirs, it drones, it feels like the creaking of old wood and the shrieking of old yokai. There's something stilted to combat that works in this light. As another foot soldier, you are seemingly singularly focused on rushing through and defeating the Demon King. Fighting is almost like an intricate dance made up of fancy footwork and a big finish. Stamina management, as a result, is far more important than health management, and it's rare that I died without my stamina running low first. There's a parry system that rewards bravery, but I often felt like just a little too much of a coward to commit too much to it. Dodges and kicks were my way through the labyrinth. Enemies often hide around corners, and some crawling, poisonous bugs are very difficult to hit if you aren't stomping or slashing at the right angle. In a sense, one of the toughest battles you'll face is with the game's clunky controls and your own clumsy fingers. In many other games this would be considered a flaw, but here it's a triumph. It stands in the face of so-called good design and works regardless of what is expected. Bosses in turn are interesting, both in concept and design. Though fighting is usually fairly predictable with heavy swings and choreographed movement, they often fill their boss arena, and getting through them feels genuinely satisfying, not only for the combat you've just won, but also because it marks your entry into something new. Bosses are the culmination of puzzle searches, and hurtling through them means you finally have a new area to explore or have been granted a piece of a much grander puzzle. Though Labyrinth of the Demon King is styled on older games, it's not entirely reliant on them. It has a manual save system, but also autosaves upon entry of most rooms, which on one hand sort of defeats the purpose of a specific save system like this, and on the other allows you slightly more room to plan out your paths. The central hub you enable, complete with a light, fast travel system, also feels indicative of a more modern approach to games. It gives a very brief reprieve from, well, everything, whilst also giving you an easy way to upgrade weapons, increase your gear, buy more talismans, and just drink some tea. It means you aren't being hunted down anymore, but there's this darkness to the reprieve, as you know you need to climb back out of that hole and back into the labyrinth once more. And this touches on one of the single strongest aspects of Labyrinth of the Demon King. It's actively a bit of a painful play, down to the need to constantly manage resources, struggles to actually hit some enemies, and risking death every time you take on just one too many skeletons or bugs. The atmosphere is sickly and overwhelming. The graphics are just easy enough to make out, to know where you're going, whilst also being vague enough to easily get lost. Yet, it's not even nearly the hardest game I played this year or the spookiest, it's just one of the most oppressive. At certain points, I actively disliked what I was playing, but enjoyed it after the fact. This isn't in some masochistic way, but more so a triumphant way. You are a foot soldier taking on a terrifyingly powerful demon king. You are fighting a god, and you are literally too angry to die. I think good and bad game design are mostly rules of thumb and not fact. They seem like general advice to learn as opposed to an objective truth, and games like Labyrinth of the Demon King kind of prove that. Outside of the context of the walls of the labyrinth, describing its many systems on a whiteboard might leave you to believe it's not a great game, but actually playing it reveals anything but. Labyrinth of the Demon King is so strong-willed and coherent that it's so easy to love. It's a frightening tower in the middle of a fog, too impossibly large to foreseeably get through, yet you have the key and the will. You know what's ahead of you, you just have to continue until you can't anymore. Luckily, there's a save station right here, and we're not turning it off until you win. Thank you for listening to my thoughts on Labyrinth of the Demon King. That was a strange game that I liked a lot, and it's so likable, I think, is where I came at this whole thing from. It's really strange to play a game and realize you don't like what you're doing that much, but you still kind of do. This was also a particularly weird one because I didn't really know anybody playing it or didn't really have someone to go back and forth with who'd actually got any experience with it. So I went in very blind. I just liked the aesthetic. I liked the trailer. I thought the music was quite striking. And turns out it all really is. It's exactly what you think it is. Engaging, weird, spooky, but not an outright horror game. It's just creepy. It conjures this vibe. Anyway, if you happen to play this game, let me know. I believe it's out now. I played it just before release, thanks to a code I was given for coverage purposes. So thank you, the PR, for sending me that. If you happen to play it, let me know. If you liked it, tell me why. If you hated it, also tell me why. I think the last couple of games I've played that I've been quite positive about, every single one of them, I've totally understood why someone might hate it. Like Despelote, it's not a particularly long game. I think people might debate it's even a game at points because it's a bit more, it's a bit less interactive than you might expect. But I also really like that. I like this a lot. I think the last thing before that was Suicide Squad, and I did not like that. If you liked this video, it would really help if you like the video or subscribe or comment or check out any of my other videos off the top of my head, the Despelote and Suicide Squad one, if you want very differing opinions on video games. Those two I'd recommend checking out. Anyway, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for maybe subscribing.